Welcome back to the Building HVAC Science podcast. It's our goal to create better, more knowledgeable HVAC and building performance technicians, especially by helping the two professions better understand each other. And this podcast aims to make customers of these professionals happy in the homes and buildings they live and work in. And to do that, we feel it's our duty or obligation to impart knowledge, to impart resources, to impart stories of how these things can really come about. In this episode, Elk and I welcome Rachel Kaiser, that is Eric's wife, to discuss a topic that's oftentimes overlooked but really important, data integrity in our fields. Now, Rachel has a background in scientific research and data quality, and she shows how the HVAC industry generates and manages data from her observations and why data integrity matters and the risks of poor data management. We talk about some real-world examples and discuss how digital tools, a lot of the tools we sell at TruTech, can both help and hinder data integrity. And Rachel comes up with a great acronym for us, breaking down the key principles of data integrity. And I'll let you listen to the podcast to figure that one out, or you could read in the show notes. We typed it up there. We also talk on how connected tools, data logging, and digital advancements are reshaping HVAC really, really fast. And this makes accurate data, well, I'll just say makes data more accessible. Accuracy is part of that acronym about some of the key principles, but it also increases the need for awareness and best practices. And if you ever question how reliable your measurements are or how much you can trust the data, this episode is a must listen. Okay, on to Rachel Kaiser talking about data integrity in HVAC, why it matters more than you think.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Building HVAC Science podcast. Eric Kaiser over here and Mr. Bill Spohn over there. Hello, sir.
Hello.
You want to introduce our guest today? I feel like I shouldn't be introducing our guest today.
You've introduced her already to the world, to your world. She's been introduced to the world before.
To our world, realistically, yeah.
So we have with us today, Rachel Kaiser. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We have a really interesting topic to cover, but first I wanted to get your reaction. We all and a few others from the TruTech team spent some time together last week at the HVAC School Symposium, and then following that, the HR Expo. I just kind of want to get your insider/outsider view and take on that. Just a few minutes.
Yeah. First, I want to absolutely thank all the TruTech team for making me feel like that part of the team throughout the events and the time that we were all together. Can't thank you guys enough for that inclusion. And then as far as the events themselves, the symposium is always an absolutely amazing event to get to attend in person because of just how much learning and networking engagement it provides. And the new venue this year with the bigger stages for all the talks, I think really was a benefit in a lot of ways to having the availability of more people to engage with the talks across the multiple sessions occurring at the same time that I don't think we saw as much in the past just due to site limitations. And the Kalos and HVAC school people pulled off an amazing event yet again under a new set of circumstances. And that was, I think, the feedback and engagements that I was able to have during the event were just really memorable. So much so that during the symposium, I forgot to take pictures with the different people I was with. That's how much the interactions were, to me, so meaningful. And then we transitioned, and AHR, I got to volunteer for HVAC school working their booth. It was in Orlando, so they had a booth again. I've had the pleasure of getting to support them in that way at every AHR expo that they've attended with their booth, and we formed a community of ourselves that there support the people coming up and asking the questions and learning about what opportunities HVAC school provides, whether they're in the US or not, and the growth that they're doing on so many questions on the Spanish options that they had and what they're doing to grow that out was really exciting. And then that tied in so well with all the people that I do already know and getting to engage with them as they came around the expo. It was a really intense week full of a lot of exciting learning for what needs to be next.
That's great. And I should have asked you to introduce yourself and your background. You're married to Eric Kaiser, my co-host here, but give us a little bit more detail on your background, your professional background.
I've actually been, as far as the HVAC and building performance, I've been focused on doing some scientific fundamental delivery in that space for 6 years now. The first symposium was the first time I got to put those skills into action, and I have grown and expanded that ever since. And that all stemmed from countless conversations with Eric and other technicians in that we had engaged with previously, and actually working HR expos all the way back in 2010 and learning about the industries and the excitement that came with that of what's the next step and looking at ways that I could give back to that growth potential. That growth potential and that scientific fundamentals comes from the fact that from an education standpoint, I went to graduate school and focused my research on inorganic materials chemistry. And so my goal is to leverage those years of classical scientific education and distill that down into what's practical and useful to be ingested by the industries.
Very cool. I don't know if either of you know this. This would be like quiz time. The original tagline for TrueTech had the word science in it. Does anybody remember that?
Wow. Oh, man. No, I don't remember that.
It was making measurement science work.
Very nice. I like that.
That is nice.
That was back a while ago. And actually, Jim Bergman asked me if he could repurpose it. I think it was for MeasureQuick. And I said, sure, why not?
Little tidbits of history we pull out of here.
Yeah, we do.
I got to meet Bill Yu the first time in 2009, but I don't remember that tagline. So that shows you.
How long was that used in the company?
I remember it printed on business cards and on our website. I would really have to research to figure out. I want to say it changed to the current one in 2016. So it's probably 2009 or 2010 to 2016 was used. So data integrity, that's our big topic today. What is it? What does that mean?
The simple compressed objective around what is data integrity is essentially around the completeness, accuracy, and trustworthiness of data throughout its life cycle. And that probably still sounds pretty wordy, but when you dive into it, the details around what you need and expect branch out even broader. But essentially, I guess if you take it another step back, is you're looking at how much can you trust that data? And it's actually what I do day to day now is focus on delivering data integrity across all kinds of spaces. And that includes manufacturing and laboratories, quality organizations. So the breadth of data integrity is not a tunnel vision type of exercise. When it does become more tunneled is the expectation around control. So there are regulatory agencies in a number of fields around the globe that have control expectations around data. And those aren't what I'm here to talk about today. This is about sharing some principles of what data integrity is, how it can be applied, and why it needs to be understood and talked about in the industries, because you don't want to get caught unawares of the topic as it gets pulled through and more times gets made into control expectations. For instance, something that Boeing, everyone about the whole door plug coming out and what was the testing that was done. There was a lack of data integrity to show the connect the dots that they had. And so that's an industry. You can have that again in the food industry where the recalls, and there's been a number of recalls, and they could not connect the dots to what testing data they had for those specific lots, which forces larger recalls because they can't exclude certain runs. So you can just keep adding the different industries in those types of scenarios in which applying the ideology of data integrity can save you a lot of time and money in the long run.
So it's that risk factor. The investment is risk avoidance. Is that true? the investment in good data integrity? Appropriate.
In a general sense, yes. If just the topic of data integrity is about understanding the risk so that you can right size what risk you are tolerant of having and taking as you move your activities, your business forward. So it changes a little bit when you get forced to do them, but you want to do these, honestly, a lot of understanding of data integrity you want to do on the front end, especially as business owners, but it's also just as important when you're a technician in the field to understand what a number of the principles and components are.
And it may seem like a trivial example, but Eric, maybe you recall this. I recall somebody arriving at a house to do work, started to do demolition, removal of equipment. They were at the wrong address.
I've heard that story, and I think I've seen some of those videos. It's not pretty.
No, that's a huge issue. Just a little bit of loss of integrity of that data there. And that you can't say that was a mistake, but I think it continues to go deeper than that. That's a real commonplace example.
Yeah, that's a very commonplace example. One of the things I wanted to pull out of what Rachel mentioned there was data life cycle. Can you describe what is the life cycle of data? And if we're trying to figure out what the life cycle of data is, how do we start figuring out what that is?
A lot of that comes down to you want to begin with a high-level process map. And this doesn't have to be something that's super formal. It can be conversational, but it's the coming in and saying, where do I create data? How do I use the data? How long do I need to access the data? And what do I do with the data when I am done with it? And those spaces encompass your life cycle in a very high level viewpoint. And it doesn't matter if that data is paper-based, electronic system-based, a combination across that flow. That's what you need to start to understand is if you collect, say, a data and generate it at a system on a set of digital gauges, but then you write it down on a piece of paper because you're making notes for the customer's system history, but your company needs to keep those notes for as long as you have the service contract with that customer. That's helping inform you how long you need to keep it. And then when that customer's system goes away, you then need to know that you need to discard those because you no longer have that system to support. So that's the overall life cycle example of the main steps that you would need to consider, because where you have risks across that life cycle changes. You may, in your business or process flow, have more concern about the generation than the overall retention. Maybe that's how you execute your business. You only have 2 techs, so the probability is that it's the same person always going to that house. That would mean that the retention is less critical than if you have 50 techs and it's never the same one going to the house. That data compiled together becomes far more critical if it's another person trying to understand what the system status has been. Does that help a little bit on that question around life cycle and where the points are that can help?
I think this is a totally new topic for me, and I'm going to assume it's very new for our listeners too. So it's great to have you explaining it from some of these fundamental levels. We talked before we got started about the fire hose and data that's being generated. Eric, you have a really good perspective, your time in the industry. When do you think it went from like a trickle to a fire hose?
We've always generated a lot of data. And the more instruments we put on a system or on a piece of equipment, the more data is generated. Now, what we're not doing a great job of, in my opinion, is recording that data in a robust manner. A lot of times, we're taking a snapshot of it. We might be taking a snapshot by writing down some immediate numbers on a piece of paper or typing a single time point data value into a work order and assuming that that number is not really changing much, or maybe there's a little bit of hysteresis, but the technician is okay with that. And then there's the flip side of this, that maybe that technician is just recording what the paper wants to see. in order to get a good response. Because if there is maybe a built-in response of, hey, if this number's out of X range, then we're going to create something different, or it might create more work for that technician.
Or you're not done. You're not done yet.
Yeah, you're not done. You want to go home for the day. Or you got to do some more work and the dispatcher's rushing you onto the next call because they have a schedule that they've made and they want you to keep that schedule, or there's more customers promised. But the other challenge that I find there is where we find pencil whipping. And that's a really common thing in the industry that I see both in HVAC and building performance. People will write down the numbers that they think someone else wants to hear or see written on that report, rather than taking an accurate assessment of those numbers. Especially a lot of times we're human, we're lazy, we don't want to do more work if we don't have to. So a lot of technicians will write down numbers that aren't quite accurate.
Or we don't understand the significance.
Yeah, we don't understand the larger significance. One of the things that's probably been recorded for the longest time in the industry is actually combustion values out of a combustion analyzer through the printouts on those. But even those are a single time point, and it's only that one time point that we're recording. Maybe we'll print out two if somebody's lucky, and we'll do two different time points. But there's a lot more to the operation than this. And that's where I see we are generating tons and tons of data, but we're not recording it robustly. We're not making sure that the data coming out of the instruments that we're generating the data with is actually being recorded in a robust value where we can go back and recall it later to do maybe troubleshooting or see what's changed or watch it and see what's happening.
That's that life cycle you're missing, that there's a life cycle to that data, not just generating it in the moment. That's, to me, is what I see.
And that, I think, really is something, honestly, that as I look at the industry, that products like VRF have done a lot better job of, because they have data logging features on them. And a good VRF technician, when they walk up onto a system, one of the first things they're going to do is plug in a computer and they're going to data log that system. And they might do it for hours because they're complex systems. Well, even what we think about as quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here, simple systems can have a lot of changes in them because there's a lot of different things that affect them.
Want to divert to a personal example? When you came over to help troubleshoot my system and you hooked up a pocket oscilloscope, you were trying to log data and look for anomalies, very, very fine anomalies, would you say?
Yeah, small anomalies, because in communicating systems, we were looking at communications at that point in time, and very, very fine anomalies can have a big difference in communication, digital communications.
You drop data.
Yeah, you drop data packets. If you watch Roman Baugh's presentation on data from the symposium, that's a really good one to watch to understand that. He's got some really good slides and examples in there on data packets and what happens when they get dropped.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and it actually ties to Dirk's and my talk, like the combustion example with the app that Dirk built out. It's showing the same thing with the combustion. If you do a single data grab at the wrong moment on the combustion data that he has visualized, you would have a completely different take of what's happening with the system, that you have to look at it with some time within the data acquisition to see the trends that are occurring, but also to get that the system is stabilizing. And so that, to me, is another example of tying to that combustion that Eric brought up of printing it out. We could get a completely different solution of what's drive to the incorrect solution based on a single screen grab.
So true.
Or printout.
And another pre-recording note that I made here from our conversation, I just wrote down, it looks like a bumper sticker to me, digital de-risks data. What's your response to that?
So it de-risks in a number of ways and gives a lot more opportunity for understanding and controlling, but it doesn't eliminate it. It just gives, honestly, it's usually a case that you're more easily able to deliver the key principles around data integrity, which I haven't gotten to go over yet. So can I jump into what some of those are?
Yes, please. Please.
There's a number of key principles around the expectations to be able to deliver that integrity component to all this data that we're generating. And I mean, this applies in our daily lives as well, but usually doesn't have quite as robust a process intended around it. But those areas, I'm just going to list them out. The data needs to be attributable. It needs to be legible. It needs to be contemporaneous, original, accurate, complete, consistent, enduring, and available. It's a lot of fun words.
I challenge you to make an acronym.
It's
I stopped writing after a while.
It's ALCOA plus.
Okay. All right. So attributable, legible, contemporaneous,
Original, and accurate. That's the first acronym. And then it was the realization that's not enough. And then they added the handy dandy plus symbol to cover the 4 additional pieces that, as we move to a lot of digital sources, that needed to be all there, which was complete, consistent, enduring, and available. Now, those last 4 also apply when you have paper. It's not that this is an either or. So if you're looking at something that's legible, that applies to a paper system in that if you have someone that's writing and you can't tell the difference between an S and a 5 and you're looking at a part number, that's a legibility problem and therefore upends your integrity around what you're sharing between your communications. And that has a very quick downside to what you're trying to achieve. Be it you order the wrong part because you read it as a 5 and it's an S, or things like that. So that's where you are instantly accepting risk with legibility, for instance. But that also applies to digital systems in that if you have data that's created in a digital format but can't be read by anything else, that it's not in a convertible type format, that you don't have it in a PDF or you can't get it by any other means than that original instrument, for instance.
That would be a original software, right? Whatever the software package is.
Correct. Usually it's software package is. That may not be legible for what your downstream process is. So then you have a legibility issue of you can't read it because the digital systems don't align. So legibility is one of those that I always default to. That's a paper problem, but it's not. It's a digital system problem as well. So what we were talking about already with the oscilloscope data, the combustion analyzer, complete comes into play because what you're not looking at then is the complete picture of the data around what's happening at that system. If you take those snapshots, you are assuming risk. That data is telling you what's happening when there's a lot more data already being generated within that system that you aren't taking into account. So those are some of the really quick examples of things that we've already talked about. You need to know who it was that did it. That going back to that pencil whipping, which is the antithesis of data integrity. If you had a means by which you knew that an individual had technician A was the one that was collecting the data for a test in the field. And then you have reports as that output, and Tech A's reports, that data for the reports came out on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, over and over with the same numbers, but you knew it was always that tech, but say they didn't work on Wednesday. Now that's part of how you can use a data integrity mindset to say, this is attributing to that pencil whipping idea, that we're just using one data set that passed to say that system after system or process after process is being achieved at the level expected. And so that's where sometimes digital can be a benefit, is a lot of times you get a lot more of that easy attributability while not being there in person to observe it.
Yeah. Geez, I'm going to struggle with the name here, but Jim Bergman and I worked on various energy savings programs for utilities, and the quality of data had to be high enough because there were public money involved. And do you remember the app that used to run on the Palm Pilot, Eric?
I do. Somewhere I can't remember the name of that.
It was Cool something?
Possibly.
That wasn't Cool Cow.
No, it wasn't Cool Cow.
I'll have to look that up. But the guy that developed it, Buck Taylor, I remember he always talked about building in anti-gaming checks as the data came in, because a lot of it was keyed in data, typed in data,
Yeah.
saying things that are physically impossible, bringing up errors and alerts. I guess that would be easier in digital now.
Yes. That piece, though, that's a prime example of where understanding what risks you're putting in that system of if you have a digital capture for building out that report to be able to move it to that's electronic, but you're actually compiling data from a variety of sources, that's a different kind of risk than just having individual data acquisition systems. So you end up in the same way that Eric, I know in different talks, has talked about compounding your error. This is compounding your integrity risk. Is if you have a case that you have data risks for what was generated at the initial generation point, but then you move the data where you're compiling from a number of generation points, you've compounded your risk of that all compiling and being robust and accurate and all those complete to be able to drive you to the end result that you want. And so that's where breaking down and understanding what your process is and where you are willing to take the risks. Oftentimes it's financial because putting in control mechanisms or things like that that take out the ability to do certain data manipulations are time costly as well as dollar costly. And so it's not always that you can remove them easily, but you have to know that they're there so that when you unearth a problem or you're working in a program that has an expectation of a given level, maybe you need to take some different actions or do spot checks to say, are individuals doing what we expect them to be doing? Because there is a heightened data risk in that space. So those are some of the things philosophically that you want to start considering when you're building out a data integrity mindset and trying to de-risk what you have going in a particular instance.
Is everybody else's brain exploding at the moment?
Yeah, like I said, I think I've encountered the topic, but at the fringes and in like a little blips in the center, but not this complete thought process before. And it makes total sense. And I think what I'm hearing and what I would advise, and I think what you're saying is got to pay attention. Got to start paying attention.
Yes, and that's just it. You don't want to be caught in a situation of programs or regulations or anything coming in and forcing an expectation that you can't achieve, because that's when it's really destabilizing to what you're doing. So if you start applying some of this philosophy earlier on, it makes any of those transitions. And I mean, as you guys have highlighted, the data fire hose within the industry is just flowing at an ever higher rate. And so the probability of some need to control that data gets higher and higher as more of it is seen and leveraged. And so that's why I think it's so vital that we start having the conversation about what this approach is, because it allows you to do it and get ahead of the curve if you start thinking about it before it's required or expected, even from government programs or anything like that. It's a good way. It can help business owners, technicians in the field, as well as any of these programs to be able to understand what they're actually creating as well as the work that they're doing hands-on.
I got to say that I think the homeowners or business owners, whoever we're working for, the end customers, I think they expect the data that we gather to have integrity. Not only because we are presenting that data to them as this is what's happening, and these are our analysis based on the data. This is saying that we did our job right to start with, that we did everything right or we troubleshot this correctly. We are relying and we are putting our reputations online based on the data that we're collecting. And there have been a lot of cases, and I think a lot of us listening or that are here can probably think of cases where we've gone back and we've looked at data and we've said, oh, we didn't interpret that right. Or maybe if we had gathered more data and we had recorded that well. And this is where I think the advent of connected tools The Bluetooth tools, bringing a lot of data into central locations has been a game changer for the HVAC and the building performance industries because we can bring all this into one location. Sometimes we can record it. We can see it as a technician. It's one of the things that I love about the Bluetooth apps where we're connecting our tools and we're bringing all this data because these systems are dynamic. They're constantly changing and fluctuating just slightly sometimes and sometimes a lot. And to be able to have all of that data right in front of us at the same time, because part of data integrity is not only gathering that data, but then presenting it to the person that's making that decision in a way that they can understand it and make decisions accurately off of that data, interpret that data well. And this is something that I think the industry in the past has really not had the right tools to do. And now that we have all these connected tools, we're actually starting to be able to do this in a good manner.
And that's why I think it's right at that prime. Like now it's the realization the industry has so much data available to them of applying the proper life cycle, understanding of what you're going to do with it. You can build this in on the front end. There aren't so many established expectations of a process flow because you've not had this data available in a lot of the situations as robustly as you have it now, thanks to the tools and the software that allows you to pull things together and options like that. And that's why having this dialogue and continuing these types of discussions on these principles is so key.
I also believe that society expects higher integrity because it's all around us, higher in data integrity. And it may be disappointing when it's not delivered, but it's an external pressure. It's not just something that our industry should do. Every industry is looking at this.
That is correct. It is. It's across. It essentially comes to the fact that if you look holistically, there's been a reduction in trust. So you have to do additional things around what you're creating to reestablish some of that trust and not devalue the fact that you're going in as the subject matter expert and you want to have that data support that you are the subject matter expert.
Can you talk a little bit, Rachel, about what it means to have the raw, because we have raw data that we collect from sensors, that we collect direct from meters, but then we actually sometimes combine that data to get other values or show other values that help us make decisions. What should we be doing? Because that to me is like two different data streams. It's a combined readings make another value, like superheat and subcooling, I think, right off the top of my head. What should we be doing with that data and how should we be thinking about that?
So that goes back to you have to look at that life cycle of where are your sources of generation? What are you trying to have them to be able to take action on? How long do you need to keep that as usable data? So that comes into that process definition step. Because then what you're going to be looking at is you need to take things of when you're combining those multiple data generation into, say, a calculation space that gives you your output that you can act on, your criticality of what's happening at those different inputs has to be individually determined, but then you also have to have checks around your calculation and the work that's happening there. That goes back to that idea that I shared of compounding your risk. If you don't understand what you're doing at the generation and where your integrity around the data or your risk acceptance is, and then your calculation is another step in that. And then from that business execution, you have the concern of if you did the calculation wrong and or you have the wrong values that fed into the calculation, does that mean you're going to do the wrong step to actually repair or set up the system in the first place? It's a stepwise backwards look that you have to take of what's the impact that you would take at a system if you don't build in the integrity or you don't understand what risk you're taking by doing, say, that calculation wrong. But if you do that calculation right, but you fed the wrong data into the calculation, what's that risk that you've just done for your desired output? And that's how the data plays into that real world outputs that you're trying to deliver each day. Does that dig into it a bit, Eric?
Yeah, that digs into it a lot more. I'm rolling around thinking in my head, Rachel and I'm going to be fully honest here, we have had a lot of really deep discussions about data integrity, and she's really good at what she does. And I'm not just saying that because she's married to me or I'm married to her. That's one reason why I really wanted to have her on this show, was because I think she can bring a different perspective than a lot of us have with regards to data integrity. And it is, to Bill's point, we've been gathering data for a long time. We've had this data, but now we have the ability to record it with things like GPS on phones or devices. We have the ability to prove where it was recorded, timestamp it, because time is a whole nother metric that goes into this data. Like, when was it collected? How long was it collected? We can do things like averaging data, the mean of the data over a time period. So many different things can be done. And part of that is making sure that we interpret the data properly and record what we did for our interpretation.
Yeah, because it's time for, to me, the industry now has enough data sources that are available. It's time to put that data to work for the desired outputs that you have, and not just take them as one-offs that you're trying to independently act on. It's time to start aggregating that data to drive faster abilities to react to what's happening with systems and things like that. It will take time to build out those, but the key to me is bringing in a data integrity approach to those construction of those types of bringing data to bear for your desired output. You have it now. You didn't have it in the same robust manner before. Let's use it to improve what the industry is doing.
I want to start to wrap up here with one example that I think hit the market, hit a bunch of people within about the last year or so, when MeasureQuick stopped doing screenshots. And it was in regard to losing that attachment to the piece of equipment and the time that the measurement was taken. Basically, it was a digital pencil whip that couldn't be tolerated in a lot of programs. So Jim and the programmers had to come up with a way that screenshots could now have GPS location plus date and time. So they added 2 attributes to the screenshot, which allowed them to return screenshots to taking place. So it's just hitting me now. That was a data integrity issue.
Yeah, that's the attributability and how you can have that original component with those stamps. So breaking it down further, that's what I look at is data isn't just a value. Data is actually the data packet. And that's what has to have the integrity around it, is the entire packet that supports what we human-wise see as that value of data. But it's actually holistically more. But that's a whole broader and deeper dive that didn't seem like the appropriate place to start.
Okay. So as people take off their scuba gear here, after taking a shallow dive in the topic of data integrity, any closing thoughts for our listeners, Rachel?
My take-home message would be to start looking at where you have data coming in, how you collate your data, what you want to use it for, and start considering what your risk tolerance is and how you can apply some basic data integrity principles that we've started to talk about into those, because that's going to be such a value add as we move forward.
Do you have any resources, public resources or resources of your own on this topic, something you would point to and say, this is a good primer?
I am sad to say that off the top of my head, I don't have anything in the public domain to be able to answer that. I would be glad to look and do a bit to figure out public domain pieces as a follow-up.
Okay. We can add that to the show notes basically at any time, and it will, even after it's published, it will republish with those in the show notes. So look in the show notes for some pub domain sources to dig a little deeper that have been approved by Rachel. Thank you for coming on today, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Where can people find you and get a hold of you if they want to?
Oh, yeah, please.
I'm on just as Rachel Kaiser, so.
Okay, we'll throw that link in there. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate you lending us your ears in your brain to think about this pretty intense topic of data integrity. I think we'll be talking more about this in the future. You can leave us a voicemail by going to our podcast page. That's buildinghvacscience.com, clicking on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner. We also encourage comments and feedbacks no matter what platform you use and enjoy our content on. Well, hopefully enjoy our content. If you have any questions or want to suggest a topic, reach out to us at marketing@truetechtools.com, TRUTECHTOOLS.com. And some of the topics we discuss require technical training for proper interpretation or safe execution. So if you're a trained pro, you can proceed immediately, but if you're not, please consult with a pro and hire one. The Building HVAC Science podcast is a production of TrueTech Tools Limited. And full disclosure, I'm an owner of TrueTech, and Rachel Kaiser is an employee of TrueTech. And the opinions expressed are those of my guests, my co-host, or myself, depending on who is speaking, of course. If you're in the market for tools or test instruments mentioned in the podcast, look at what TrueTech Tools carries, TRUTECHTOOLS.com. You can use the offer code HVACBS for a nice discount. I want to thank you for listening and following us at Building HVAC Science. We look forward to another great year of more content that you will find interesting, stimulating, and if it's annoying, send us an email, marketing@truetechtools.com. Thanks a lot. Take care.